Sometimes I think I regret reading that damn diary, but at the same time I have to admit that I have never felt such excitement in my life. There is even an element of pleasure in this pain. My wife Sandra left for work training, her fourth this year. It was inconvenient, but I didn't really care unless I thought the company was asking too much of her. If the training is useful for them, then I see no reason why you should take it on your own time, I objected. Sandra explained that this was due to personnel issues and made me accept that sacrificing our time together was worth it if it improved her career prospects. I think I should describe Sandra. She is 165 centimeters tall, slim, and prefers to keep her hair quite short. Her face, figure, and legs are fine, although none of these features stand out as exceptional. However, in company, she makes up for this with her liveliness and flirtatiousness. Unfortunately, in bed, on the contrary, she is quite modest. We make love once a week, on Saturdays, almost always in one position, but sometimes we practice other positions after we saw it shown in some television series. A few years ago, I made the mistake of letting her catch me reading erotic stories on the internet. This led to a terrible fight, and even now, if I ever suggest trying something new in bed, I hear the reproach. Have you started reading your dirty stories again? As any husband knows, being left alone can eventually become boring as hell. It's strange, but the hobbies that captivated me when my wife was around lost all interest when she wasn't there. It got to the point where I was just wandering around the house, mindlessly opening and closing drawers, and that's how I came across her diary. I noticed her writing in it at night all year without feeling the slightest curiosity, and even then I took up this thick notebook without any desire to know its contents. I started reading simply out of boredom. At first, apart from the mentions of who she danced with and stolen kisses, it was less interesting than watching a fly crawling on the ceiling, and I would have quit reading before the end of the first month, if not for that internal rule. If you start, you have to finish. I made my way through 6 weeks of recording everyday trifles, with occasional mentions of long-forgotten events and glimpses of memories to somehow relieve the boredom. But then, in mid-February, everything changed, as indicated by the big red star above the entry. Friday, February 15th. After 12 years of marriage, I finally cheated on Don. I didn't allow myself to be fucked, but in some ways it was even worse. I always refused to satisfy Don and called him a pervert for asking for it, but for a long time I wanted to try, especially after talking to girls, but I couldn't just change my mind after all these years without any reason. In a club with girls, I kissed a guy in the corner, and it was obvious that he was very excited, so when he asked me to go outside, I agreed. The back seat of his car was too small to do much more, and besides, there were only 15 minutes left before the girls went to the taxi. I knew what I wanted, although I think he only expected to feel me. I think I did it pretty well for a complete newbie, and he definitely didn't complain. His name was Jake. We only exchanged names when I left. I was devastated. Until that moment, I believed that with a loving wife and 2 beautiful children, in a classic nuclear family, I was living, if not a better life, then at least one that was far from unpleasant. Now my whole world has collapsed. For long minutes I sank into the abyss of despair, with tears flowing uncontrollably down my cheeks, but then strange realities began to penetrate my consciousness. My heart was beating loudly and at a very fast speed, and I was more excited than perhaps ever before. I certainly felt despair, but there was an undeniable sense of delight in it. The drink became a necessity, complemented by a cigarette. When I returned to reading, the natural inclination was to skip straight to next Friday, but I forced myself to continue sequentially. Saturday, February 16th. I can't believe I did this last night, but I don't regret it. I can't wait for next time. If it works, I'll go much further, but I'm not sure where yet. Next Friday seems so far away. I hope it will be with Jake. The thought of us having sex excites me. Sandra's Friday night outings began early last summer. For years, our entertainment consisted of eating out twice a month and going to the movies once a month, while her parents did babysitting duties. Then 3 years ago, I joined a local history group that met on Wednesday nights, so when my wife demanded her night of entertainment, I couldn't refuse. She was supposed to go to a small nightclub in a nearby town with her friend Eliza. A big guarantee of safety was that 4 other women from our area traveled to the club independently, but took taxis home together. I didn't know that Eliza soon stopped going, and when I heard that she and her husband had separated, I didn't connect it with the club. I asked Sandra what was going on there, mainly to gauge how often she interacted with men. Everyone comes to have fun, so there is a little flirting, but it's just a joke and doesn't mean anything, she told me, and I was fine with that. I described the first diary entries as harmless, but they indicated that there was more flirting than she was letting on. Several different men were judged on their kissing ability, and one of them wrote, "He just couldn't keep his hands off my chest, it felt pretty good." In early January, as a precursor to Friday's revelation, Sandra described someone with an exceptionally long tongue who turned her on greatly, adding in a humorous manner that if there was a comfortable bed nearby, she wouldn't know what might happen. Sunday, February 17th. Time is crawling. Don wanted sex last night, but I need so much more than he can offer. I refused. Tuesday, February 19th. At this time, in 3 days, I will probably have good sex. I wish it was Jake, but I'm going to sleep with anyone who asks me, even that big black doorman. Wednesday, February 20th. At work, Derek said that I had a special sparkle in my eyes, but that was a long time ago when he tried to get into my panties. I used to think he was pompous, but he actually doesn't look that bad. Only 48 hours left. Derek is Sandra's boss. She has spoken about him several times, usually with contempt. Thursday was empty. I remember that around that time she started spending her evenings taking long baths, getting her hair done, waxing her legs, and doing other things like that. I needed to light one more cigarette before moving on to Friday, because any hopes that she might remain faithful were dashed by yet another big red asterisk. Friday, February 22nd. It happened. I had sex, and it was Jake. Absolutely amazing. I couldn't even imagine it. Jake was at the club when we got there, and I think he was looking for me. Immediately, he suggested we go somewhere else. The place he took me to wasn't a motel, because you pay for the room by the hour. I think it's a place where easy-to-reach girls bring their clients. It made me feel slutty, and I loved it. He didn't waste time on caresses. He just immediately had sex with me. But I was ready, oh yes, I was ready. He didn't have a condom, and of course neither did I, so I hope everything will be okay. It was fantastic. I hoped he would rest and do it again, but he only paid for 1 hour. Jake drove me back to the club and then disappeared. Another guy came over and we started dancing and kissing. I was about to suggest to him that I please him when the girls came up and said it was time to go to the taxi. Never mind, it will be next week. Saturday, February 23rd. God, I hope I'm not pregnant. It's the end of the month, so everything should be okay. I'll find out on Monday. I need to go to the doctor and start taking birth control pills again, if I'm going to do this again. I'll make an appointment for Thursday, but I have to come up with some other explanation for Dawn. I will also have to hide the pills from him because it will be a disaster if he sees them. I think I should tell you something about us. I work in administration at a glass factory, where I have been since I left school. I'm really just a glorified clerk, but now I'm responsible for 2 other employees in the department. Sandra and I got married 12 years ago. My son was born 2 years later, and our little daughter was born 2 years later. Shortly after that, I had a vasectomy. Around the same time, my wife returned to work because her parents offered to watch the children during the day. She now works in a department store office and seems to be doing well. Our combined income allows us to live a decent standard of living even after we pay her mother for childcare. Sandra was 20 when we met, 2 years younger than me. People said we were being stupid getting married after only knowing each other for a year, but I was confident that I had chosen the right life partner. My wife is pretty enough that I know she's proud of her breasts and she's slim. Appearance is important to some people, but I place more importance on character, temperament, and the ability to be a good mother. Sandra is the only girl I've slept with. I think I remember her telling me about the other 2 guys before me, but I didn't really care. The sex was good. It's very nice at the right time, and in the right place, but I would never let it rule my life like so many men do. Sunday, February 24th. My stomach hurts a little, so I'm optimistic. I keep thinking back to Friday and realize that it wasn't the best sex. It was damn nice while it lasted, but even dawn keeps me satisfied longer. Monday, February 25th. Everything is clear, there is no little bastard inside me this time. The only question now is whether I'll be ready for action on Friday. If not, I can always use my mouth again. Tuesday, February 26th. Derek said this morning that I had a special twinkle in my eye, but it was a long time ago when he tried to get into my panties. I used to think he was pompous, but he actually doesn't look that bad. Wednesday, February 27th. Derek had sex with me in Vault 3 during his lunch break. There are tons of sheets and packing material that are nice to lie on. I hope we will have many such meetings. Wednesday is the only day that Joe, the storekeeper, is off work at lunchtime, which is bad. Otherwise, we could do this every day. This certainly gives new meaning to the phrase, spending your lunch break at work. This is already the third. I decided that there was no point in starting to count, because I was sure there would be quite a lot of them. He was the first person whose face I could associate with the man who was with her, and it made it easier for me to imagine them together. I met him at his company's dance 3 years ago, just after Sandra started working there. I remember he was a slightly overweight, smug man, and when she mentioned at that dance that he was always hitting on her, it didn't bother me. He flirts with all the girls, she continued. I'm just his favorite right now. I thought it was harmless. Looks like I got a lot of things wrong. Friday, March 7th. I was with Jake again. This time he took me to a motel and we had sex for over 2 hours. Andreas was a taxi driver again. When we were alone, he parked under the trees again without asking. He helped me last week, so I couldn't refuse him. I think he realized I was already with someone because he seemed especially excited. After that, he gave me a 10, saying that he forgot to give me change. I won't spend this money because this is the first money I earned by spreading my legs. It's also the first time I've had 2 different sexes in one night. Not bad for the married, respectable mother of 2 I was less than a month ago. Saturday, March 8th. Dawn has no idea what's going on. More the better. Honestly, I'm glad that she sleeps with many men and not with the same one every time. There is probably some logic to this idea, but I'm not sure what it is. I tried to analyze my feelings, but they are contradictory. I constantly feel a gnawing knot in my stomach, but at the same time, I think I have never felt so alive. At that moment, I knew it was going to be a long night because I was determined to finish reading the diary. With that in mind, I made myself a cup of tea and made myself a sandwich before settling down comfortably to read the rest. Sunday, March 9th. Dawn was unusually affectionate today, and it gave me my first twinge of guilt. He is a decent, caring man and a wonderful father, and it is not his fault that he cannot give me what I now know I need. I still love him. It has nothing to do with love. I also began to worry that what I was doing might affect the children. For a while today, I was determined to stop dating other men, but the next moment I found myself thinking that I want Derek at work tomorrow. Monday, March 10th. I managed to satisfy Derek as planned in the restroom. It was quite funny because he was holding a folder of documents in his hands so that we could justify our presence in this place if anyone asked what we were doing there. Wednesday, March 12th. What wonderful, wonderful sex, definitely the best ever. One quickie a week with Derek isn't enough for me, but I can't think of a way we could meet outside of work. I don't know if we took too long or if Joe came back early, but he saw us leaving Vault 3 and the look in his eyes said he knew exactly what we were doing. I came home glowing and was extra nice to Dawn to make up for my anger the day before. He was just as confused as yesterday, but for the opposite reason. I remember that day and especially her special glow. It reminded me of how she was when we first met, and I took it as a sign of her continued love, so it's depressing now to know that this glow was caused by sex with another man, and not my personality. Thursday, March 13th. Derek said we can't use the storage room anymore now that Joe has seen us, but we don't have any other places. Joe is an old man in his 50s, maybe even 60, but he always looks at me a certain way, and that gave me an idea. I walked up to him and brought him to vault number 3, saying that I wanted to explain what Derek and I were doing there. Once we were inside, I knelt in front of him and unzipped his fly. I said that if he turns a blind eye to our meetings with Derek in the future and does not interfere with us, then I will satisfy him once a week. I knew he would agree. Friday, March 14th. I caught that big blonde guy I almost captured a couple of weeks ago. He said his name was Sven, but his accent was too local for him to really be Scandinavian. We went to his room. The sex was pretty decent, but by the time the girls and I got into the taxi, I wanted to add a little more. Disaster, the taxi driver was different. However, at the end of the trip, he parked under some trees. "My name is Costas. I'm Andreas' cousin," he said, and I don't think we exchanged any more words. Saturday, March 15th. Don wanted his marital rights before we got up in the morning. Lately, he was happy when I just satisfied him, but this time he wanted sex. Somehow it seemed to him that I was especially tuned in to him. Sunday, March 16th. Don brought me breakfast in bed, as he usually does on Sundays. I lay there and thought about how in a month I had turned from a loving, faithful wife into a real, easily accessible girl. I like it, I like it, I like it. Since the beginning of this nightmare, I have constantly moved from silent horror of betrayal to shameful excitement caused by the described actions. If she cheats on me with other men only because of the relatively small amount of my worth, then it is not my fault, whereas if she were attracted by kindness or love, it would indicate a flaw in my character. If she is only looking for those sensations that I cannot give her, then I can understand her betrayal and even forgive her. Thus, it would be illogical to think that Sandra gives her body to other men without experiencing a decrease in her love for me. Monday, March 17th. Told Derek it was okay to continue using the storage unit, but avoided explaining that I had to please old Joe to clear the space. I was hoping we could do this every day, but Derek said he couldn't have sex knowing Joe was outside listening, so it looks like I'll just have to settle for Wednesdays. Derek said he wanted to go away with me for the whole weekend. I would like this too, but it is simply impossible. Tuesday, March 18th. Derek disappeared again at lunchtime without explanation. When I couldn't find him, it made me so angry that I went to Joe and told him I would complete my weekly reward duty early. I know he'd rather have sex with me, but I just can't bring myself to do it. What if he has a heart attack or something and dies in the middle of it? Wednesday, March 19th. Things just get better with Derek every time. It would be great to spend a whole weekend together, especially with all the things he says he'd like to do with me. He thought about it and suggested how Don would react if I told him I was leaving for a 2-day course. It might work, but I'm not going to just ask him. I'll try to get him in a good mood first. My heart started racing again. Even after discovering in my diary that my wife was cheating on me with just about anyone, it still didn't occur to me that the so-called weekend training sessions could be anything other than what she says. Now it became very clear to me that right at this moment, while I was reading these words, she was having sex with someone else. It was too much. Carefully putting the diary aside, I found solace in my own hands. Friday, March 21st. There was sex, but nothing special. When I returned to the club, the bouncer looked at me strangely. He's really very handsome, but I'm not sure if I could be with a black man. Carlos was driving again. He started giving me money for change too. Saturday, March 22nd. I was very sexy and affectionate with Don. I mentioned the possibility of going to a course, and he didn't mind at all, except to say that it should take place during working hours and not on weekends. He asked if there were any booklets about the course, and like a fool, I said I would bring one to show him. If I hadn't said that, I don't think he would have insisted on seeing anything. Sunday, March 23rd. When the kids went out to play, I went back to bed and had sex with Dawn. I began a campaign to please him before I could go away for the weekend with Derek. I even liked it, especially hugging after this is something I can never do with other men. Monday, March 24th. Derek says he'll forge some paperwork about our pretend course that I can show don't we just need to decide what weekend it will be. Wednesday, March 26th. Katie brought home a drawing from school in which she depicted me as an angel. This caused me to have an attack of conscience because lately I have been looking more like a fallen angel. Friday, March 28th. Met up with Jake again. I like to expand my experience, but after last Friday, it was nice to be with a trusted person. Jake is getting better, but if he had a little more imagination, he could be fantastic. The girl in the taxi who gets out in front of me is named Della. She has a very attractive, sensual face, and I would kill for legs like hers. She noticed that I looked like I was having a good time, and we started talking. We've talked before, but we've never discussed sex. I told her about Jake, and she nodded understandingly when I said he had no idea how to use his tongue. Wednesday, April 2nd. After sex, Derek showed me a brochure about our planned imaginary courses. This will be the weekend from Friday, the 23rd of April. He says Angie in accounting made the booklet on her computer. There's even a photo of a hotel to make it look official. Thursday, April 3rd. I was in such a good mood that I let old man Joe have sex with me. It didn't kill him, so I'll bribe him this way in the future. He turned out to be quite good for an old man. Friday, April 4th. As I approached the club, Marcus, the bouncer, pulled me aside. He asked if I had a date, and when I shook my head, he asked if I wanted one. I thought he meant himself and hesitated because of the question about skin color. He realized my mistake and said with a laugh, "No, not me, you're not so lucky." The man he found for me then approached an older man with a hard Italian face, and as soon as he spoke, I realized that he was an American. He took me to an expensive hotel. When we were dressed again, he took out a huge wad of money and gave me £50. By this time, it was too late to catch a taxi with the girls, so he called another one that took me straight home, and it didn't cost me anything. Tuesday, April 8th. At work, I thought about the fact that for the first time, I sold my body without realizing it. I must have been smiling to myself because when I looked up, Ken Fisher was there, and he clearly thought I was smiling at him. That slimy little bastard doesn't stand a chance, but nothing bad will happen if I let him dream. Wednesday, April 9th. After we finished having sex in the storage room, Derek confessed where he disappeared to at lunchtime. He said that for the last 2 years, long before we started anything, he slept with Angie from accounting. He explained that Angie's husband is very jealous and constantly watches her, but allows her to ride to work in their motorhome. So almost every lunch break Angie rides off into the woods on it and Derek joins her there. I'm not faithful to him, so I can't be jealous because of her. Thursday, April 10th. I did a really stupid thing. I was so upset that Derek was sleeping with Angie instead of me that on the spur of the moment I let Ken Fisher take me to the vault. It was terrible, and now I have to keep doing this to him. Otherwise, he will spread rumors about me throughout the work. This means I'll have to shift Old Man Joe to Friday when I usually try to be fresh for the evening. And on top of everything else, now I will have the opportunity to have lunch in the canteen only 2 days out of 5. Friday, April 11th. Marcus grabbed me again, but this time he didn't offer me another partner. "Did you enjoy it with my friend last week?" he asked, pointing with his fingers that he meant money, and only then did I realize that more money had been handed over last week than the £50 I had earned. Marcus is actually quite impressive, and I don't mean his blindingly white teeth. Unless it was an optical illusion, he had a pretty decent snake hiding in his pants. The guy I found for the evening wasn't particularly well endowed. There was a week break, and I can't figure out why. She caught a mild flu, but only missed 3 days of work. Friday, April 18th. I caught a young guy. We were so engrossed in each other that I barely noticed the wind and rain lashing the windows, and I was quite surprised to see how much water there was on the streets on the way back to the club. The taxi had to drive very slowly because visibility was extremely poor, even with the windshield wipers running at maximum speed. After the message came, Andreas said he couldn't take me home because the road was flooded near the river, and you could see from his face that he was terribly upset. knowing that he would miss out on his usual dose of sex. At this point, Della said that it was no problem and that she could put me up for the night. In her apartment, she showed me that there was only one bed and asked if I minded. I said I don't mind. After dinner, she asked if I had sex every Friday. I answered yes and asked how she was doing. I only go to the club to appear normal, she said. I don't really like men that much. I must have been looking at her with my mouth open, because she took advantage of the moment, took my face in her hands, and kissed me. It was only the briefest of contact, because then she stepped back, laughing, and said, "You're stuck because of the flood, you have to share a bed. I'm telling you that I love women, and to confirm your worst fears, I'm kissing. Where will you run away now?" I felt a completely different kind of excitement and told her, "I'm not sure I want to run anywhere." We kissed a little more to seal the deal, but while we drank the hot drink she had prepared, we didn't talk about sex, although what was about to happen was up in the air. In the bedroom, we both undressed ourselves. Sandra came home with a very dreamy look on her face that Saturday. At one point, it looked like the road would be impassable for days, but a broken dam upstream seemed to have taken the pressure off our area. Monday, April 21st. I think about Friday night all the time, and I can't help but drool when I remember what we did with each other. The inevitable conclusion is that I absolutely love women because the prospect of doing it again with sweaty, selfish men disgusts me. Tuesday, April 22nd. Completely ignored Ken Fisher when he winked at me. Let him return to his toilet pleasures, as they say he did before I took pity on him. Wednesday, April 23rd. I went to the pantry with Derek, not feeling particularly enthusiastic, but I can say that he quickly reminded me of the joys. I'm looking forward to the weekend. It's going to be fantastic. Friday, April 25th. I arrived at the hotel, and the weekend was ahead. Compared to the measly 45 minutes I have with Derek during my lunch break, 40 hours of his company seemed like heaven. It met and even exceeded expectations. Derek couldn't be counted out for effort, but in terms of technique, compared to the finesse and light touch of my lover, I can't give him more than a 9 out of 10. Later, he introduced me to new experiences. Hour after hour, it was a long kaleidoscope of sex, and I truly believe that out of the entire period, I spent more time with Derek inside me than doing anything else. It was kind of funny when I got home because Don asked me if it was hard. Keeping a straight face, I told him that I had to work hard to get everything done. Monday, April 28th. Who's great? After dinner, Don started asking me about the weekend, so I had to be very careful and creative in what I said. In the heat of the moment, I told him that there would be 3 more such courses, once a month, and asked if I could go to them. He didn't even hesitate, saying, "Yes, dear, if it will benefit you, then you should go for it." I love him. It was nice to say with complete honesty that this weekend really did me good. Hopefully Derek will be able to attend these other weekends. Friday, May 2nd. I had pretty mediocre sex with a very nervous guy who I think was cheating on his wife for the first time. Sex in the back seat of a car isn't very good anyway, but when a guy is shaking, it's just hopeless. In the taxi on the way home, my heart started pounding as soon as I saw Della. I moved closer to her, and when she didn't say anything, I begged, "Can I come to you again?" She just shook her head, kind of softly, so I begged, "Please, I think I could give up men altogether if I could be with you." "That's why," she told me, "there is a danger that you will really fall in love with me, and I am too depraved for that. I like to seduce women and see the look on their faces when they realize that it has always been in their nature. I'll have sex with you again because you were great, but not now." Saturday, May 3rd. I went with Don to a free dinner my company was hosting for employees and guests, and the table position could have been awkward. On one side of the table, Derek was next to me, and on the other side was Angie. Derek's wife sat opposite us, next to Don and Angie's husband. To add some spice to the situation, to my right was old Joe, and 2 seats down the table, the evil eyes of Ken Fisher were staring at me throughout the meal. I could barely taste the food, afraid that something inappropriate might be mentioned. In fact, the only really sticky moment came after the meal, when I spoke quietly to Derek. Don came over and asked if he had heard me take the course. Derek responded with real grace. If I remember the conclusion correctly, she showed enthusiasm, energy, and a real talent for innovation. As I started looking through the diary, I came to the conclusion that I needed to be pragmatic about the fact that Derek had Sandra on a regular basis. However, this humor directed at me made me want to hit him. Wednesday, May 7th. Derek's wife is a very attractive woman, so I think he's lucky he has sex with me or Angie at lunchtime and then comes home to her at night. Friday, May 9th. Marcus arranged for me to meet another Yankee who took me to the same expensive hotel that Black Dorman must have some very rich friends for a bouncer. I returned home with 200 pounds in my wallet. Tuesday, May 13th. My feelings for the children and Dawn have become much more intense lately. I may be happier and more fulfilled and have a lot more love to give. Friday, May 16th. I met that young guy again. He's phenomenal. I'd love to have him as a pet that I could keep in the closet and let him out every evening when Dawn is asleep. In the taxi, Della gave me a certain look that made me realize I wasn't coming home. When I told Andreas that I would go out with her, I think for a moment he thought he could lure us both in, but I shook my head. I knew Dawn would be in bed, but I needed to let him know I wasn't coming home so he wouldn't worry about my absence in the morning. I told him I was helping Della with a broken pipe, and Della said something loudly about catching the drops in a bucket, so he knew I was really at her house. Saturday, May 17th. Returning home only on Saturday morning meant I had to go to the supermarket in the afternoon with Dawn and the kids, which led to a rather awkward encounter. I was busy going over my list when warm hands covered mine on the handle of the cart and a voice said, "I didn't know you lived nearby." I looked up and saw the smiling face of my young companion from last night. He continued enthusiastically, "My mother lives around the corner. If I had known about this yesterday, I could have given you a ride home and—" At that moment, Don stood up from the shelf where he was selecting an item and threw a can into the cart as I began to talk quickly, desperately trying to end the conversation before my admirer said something unnecessary. "This is my husband, Don," I said. "Don, may I introduce to you?" And then I realized that despite 2 evenings of very intense sex with him, I did not know this young man's name. "Chris," I continued, improvising. "Chris works on computers at work." Chris tried to help by saying, "Yes, I'm a programmer. What is it called?" It was pathetic. There was some formal exchange of pleasantries. I think they shook hands, and luckily Chris left. "I thought he said he saw you last night?" Don asked suspiciously when we were alone. I tried to think of something plausible that would sound at least a little like "last night," but nothing came to mind, so all I could do was firmly say, "You're wrong," and quickly push the cart forward to show that discussion is over. Later, when Dawn went alone to the deli counter, I noticed my young lover hiding behind a mountain of bananas, smiling devilishly at me. I found that meeting very strange because the young man clearly didn't know what to say and Sandra looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. It all seems so obvious now, but at the time my suspicions were completely suppressed by his youth. Friday, May 23rd. I arrived at the hotel for my second weekend with Derek, hoping for another sex marathon, and I was not disappointed. This time he brought a bunch of sex toys that he wanted to take for the first time, but forgot. The sex itself was amazing, as always. I realized that my wife had already told me this, but in encrypted form. She returned home, looking as tired as after the first course. I asked if she had had a rough day, to which she replied, "You could say that." There were a lot of new things I had to learn, one way or another. Sandra must have taken great pleasure in verbally testing her luck in this way. Wednesday, May 28th. It seems like the whole firm knows Derek is sleeping with me. This is very unfair because he sleeps with Angie much more often, but he managed to keep it a secret. Friday, May 30th. Marcus stuck his tongue out at me at the entrance to the club. It gave me an adrenaline rush. I expected him to say something, at least about some friend who needed my help, but nothing happened, and I was a little disappointed. I came across one of those colorful guys with nothing in his pants, and by the time I got into the taxi, I was furious with disappointment. My plan was to make Andreas work twice, but one of the girls threw up on the floor, and the stench was terrible. It was impossible to have sex in a taxi because of the smell, but I couldn't do without sex, so I brought Andreas into the house, and we had it on the living room floor. I knew the kids wouldn't come downstairs, but don't often get up in the middle of the night, so it was an added thrill knowing he could walk in and catch me in the middle of sex. I remember that night well. The noises below woke me up. I realized that Sandra had returned much later than usual and just assumed that she was grabbing something to eat before going to bed. I almost went down to join her, but I didn't want to end up as she was getting up, which often happens. I remember laying there thinking she was taking an awfully long time, but I must have gone back to sleep. Thinking about it later, I remembered some screams, which I then took to be the sounds of a television or perhaps a radio. Upon learning the truth of what I had heard, I should have started crying, and indeed I felt like doing so, but my brain seemed to take this information as another reason to get excited. Sunday, June 1st. Life is wonderful. I give men so much pleasure and get so much myself without hurting anyone that I can't understand how it could be wrong. The monogamy system is stupid. I believe that every woman has the right to one man as a caring, loving, perhaps platonic long-term companion, and another or a series of other men. After the first half-dozen entries, my wife seemed to give up her star system, but before the next very long entry, there were 5 very large stars in a row. Friday, June 6th. Marcus stopped me outside the club and told me to sit in the front seat of a red sports car around the corner. I complied and sat in this spectacular Ferrari-style car for about 10 minutes, wondering what the driver would look like. Even when it was Marcus who drove us, I still thought that he would take me to some client, and it was only when we were alone in a luxurious apartment that I realized that I had finally lucked out. In the bedroom, I stood there for a moment, waiting to be unwrapped like a gift, but as Marcus began choosing CDs, I slowly began to undress myself. I was already naked to the waist when he finally paid attention to me, and his hard, rather than soft, seductive words shocked me. "On your knees, bitch." Her notes were so dense that the font became increasingly smaller, and I had to take a break to find a magnifying glass to make out all the words. By the time morning came and he was driving me home, I asked myself, "Can I see you again?" He shook his head. "Sorry, doll. I only gave you a chance because you seemed like a fun girl. When I have sex with a woman, I don't want things like IUDs, condoms, or pills to interfere with nature." No man should read such words written by his wife. I reacted poorly and fell into deep despair, but then, trying to objectively assess the situation, I asked myself, if I really love my wife, can I discount the obvious pleasure she received from this experience? This post stretched from Thursday to Saturday and also filled up all the free space at the bottom of the page. I remembered that night Sandra called to briefly say that she was staying with her friend Della again, but offered no explanation. I thought she sounded a little hoarse at the time, but the call pulled me out of a rather exciting movie, so I didn't dwell on it. Sunday, June 8th. After breakfast this morning, I lay in bed enjoying the memories of Marcus. He conquered me. I belong to Marcus, body and soul. I think I'll die if I can't have it again. I really don't like the phrase, body and soul. I was just starting to get used to the idea that my wife's physical infidelity was no big deal, but this post seemed to take their relationship with the bouncer to the next level. Wednesday, June 11th. As usual, I went with Derek, but the spark was gone. It was such mediocre sex that I half wished I had gone to the cafeteria for lunch instead. Friday, June 13th. Marcus was talking to some rude black guys, so I had to enter the club without talking to him. It had been a slow week. There weren't any decent guys, and I needed to find someone special to make this black, handsome guy jealous, or at least get him out of my system. Della walked up to me with a much younger girl in tow and said, "I want you to meet Chloe. I'm sure you'll get along with her. Chloe is new to the area, but she has a cozy apartment just 5 minutes away. Looks like my friend wanted to hand over her latest conquest." Having gathered my courage, I went outside, but another guard was on duty. He told me that Marcus had taken most of the evening off and was last seen driving away with some girl in his car. Believe it or not, the taxi took a different route this time, which meant I was dropped off first. I walked into the house, deciding to wake Dawn up and seduce him just to feel another person's body on me. I'm pretty sure she eventually changed her mind and decided to let me sleep. Wednesday, June 18th. I was so hungry for sex that on my lunch break with Derek, everything seemed as good as ever. Happiness, perhaps I returned to it again, but I'm not sure. Thursday, June 19th. Sex with Derek becomes like Chinese food only a day later, and I'm already hungry again. I'm afraid that since I need Marcus so much, this weekend may not be a good one. Friday, June 20th. My third weekend with Derek was disappointing compared to the previous ones, but I expected it to be much worse. Monday, June 23rd. I found out at work that old Joe collapsed and died over the weekend. This can't be related to me. Wednesday, June 25th. Found an excuse not to go to the storage room with Derek. He didn't seem particularly disappointed and immediately rushed to the phone I assumed to call the accounting department. I need to talk to Marcus. I know he enjoyed having sex with me, and he can't be serious about the whole pregnancy thing. I'll do whatever he wants to prove my devotion, including that very Jamaican fun. Thursday, June 26th. Today, there was a fundraiser to buy flowers for old Joe's funeral. Without showing anyone, I put a 20-pound note in the envelope. Friday, June 27th. As soon as I left the club, I approached Marcus and begged him to see me again, but he simply said that I knew the conditions. I grabbed his hand and said, "Please be reasonable. I already have a husband and 2 children, and everything will fall apart if I have a black child." He just pushed me away and said I was disrespecting him. I was desperate, so I said, "I'll do whatever you want if only you'll be with me again. I'm even willing to be your whore." This made him think. "If that's what you want, you can go to Felworth Road, to the gas meter," he told me. "If any of the girls there bother you, tell them you work for me." It took me half an hour to get there, and my shoes were not made for this kind of walking. The area was terrible, and there wasn't a soul around. It was cold in the wind, and I dreaded to think what it would be like there in winter. 2 girls stood together under a lamppost, one in short shorts, the other in a miniskirt. I stopped under the next lamp, lifted my dress, and stuck out my leg. I knew that 2 girls were watching me, and they clearly didn't like it. I stood like that for 10 minutes, no cars, no people. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw 2 girls approaching me, and I hoped that the magic name Marcus would work, because they were quite large. At that moment, a large Range Rover turned the corner, drove loudly down the street, and stopped next to me. The driver leaned over, rolled down the passenger door window, and asked if I was doing business. I was so relieved that I immediately jumped into the car, forgetting that I was supposed to check on him before getting in the car. Looking at him too late, I discovered that he was a rather young, handsome guy with a lot of gold jewelry on his hands, but with some kind of mocking smile on his face, which confused me a little. "Where do you want to go?" he asked, and that confused me because I had no idea what to say. I had to confess, so I said, "This is my first time," and then added, "in this place," so that he would not know that I was new to the game of love for money. He took me to a motel, and the whole time it seemed to me that he was very amused by this situation. Inside, he asked how much a short session cost, and when I said, "Depends on the circumstances," he wanted to know how much a long session cost. I told him to give me what he thought I was worth, and when I said we could go condomless at no extra cost, he laughed and said I was the weirdest thing he'd ever met. The sex was actually very, very good. He then solemnly counted out 3-pound 20 notes and laid them on the bed, saying, "This is for you, I'll see Marcus later." That's when it dawned on me, and I said, "You're not a real client, are you?" He confessed, saying, "Marcus called me and asked me to look after you." Friday, July 4th. I ran to Marcus with a smile and tried to push 3 neatly folded bills into his hand, saying, "I did what you said, so when will we meet?" He did not take the money and turned away, angrily saying, "I didn't promise anything." I walked around him and insisted that he had promised. "Look," he said irritably, "if you want to earn a little pocket money working on my territory, that's fine with me, but that's all you can count on." I threw the money at his feet and screamed, "You fucking black bastard," then ran away sobbing. I hid in the recess of the fire exit, crying, smoking, and crying again. I had been there a long time when a tall, unkempt black guy walked by and looked through the doorway. A few minutes later, he passed by again, and then, for the third time, he came up and started talking to me. I ended up letting him have quick sex with me. To top off this disastrous evening, the taxi driver turned out to be a stranger and, moreover, an old man. Sunday, July 6th. Before, I didn't understand girls who have sex for money. I couldn't understand why they stood half naked in any weather, walked with men who could easily maim or kill them, and then obediently gave their earnings to some lazy pimp. Now it all makes sense. I know that I would do anything for Marcus, and no matter how badly he treated me, I would keep coming back in the hope that he might want me again. Wednesday, July 9th. Angie was on sick leave until today. Derek asked if I minded if he went into the woods at lunchtime instead of going to the pantry with me. I had to pretend I didn't care, but I was really disappointed. Just recently I had everything, but now I end up empty-handed. Friday, July 11th. She walked past Marcus without even looking at him. Soon I met a guy named Troy, who was just my type. He was in no hurry, but I wanted us to have sex quickly, so I asked him directly if he had a place where we could go. His face lit up, but then he became serious again and said, I have a brother living with me now. He just found out that his wife is cheating on him, and he's crazy about her. I brought him here, hoping that if I can arrange sex for him, it will become easier for him." I glanced at my brother, who was sitting gloomily in the corner, clutching a glass of beer. It only took me a second to make my decision. "If it suits you, I can take you both," I offered. So we all went to Troy's apartment and started having sex. Both brothers walked me back to the club, and I kissed each of them passionately, deliberately doing it in front of Marcus. Left alone, I gave the black man a triumphant look, as if to say, "I don't need you," but this didn't bother him at all. He again motioned to me with his tongue, and then motioned with his hands, as if he were holding a child. My insides turned to jelly, and I had to fight to keep myself from falling as I turned and headed into the taxi. Andreas was a taxi driver. I was not indifferent to the erotic imagery of this script, and I must admit that while reading it, I was more aroused than saddened. In fact, I even felt some sympathy or solidarity with my crying brother and sincerely hope that he found some comfort in the arms of my unfaithful wife. Sunday, July 13th. Forgot to mention, I always wear my wedding ring without hiding the fact that I am married. On Friday, Troy asked if my husband had ever watched me have sex with other men, and I simply said that Don didn't know what I was doing. However, I have since wondered what would have happened if he had known. Don is a calm person. He will not use violence and, most likely, will not even leave me. The most likely outcome is that he will be heartbroken, but there is a chance that he may agree to share with me, so to speak. Now I know what she does, and I'm still not sure what the answer is. Wednesday, July 16th. Derek suggested that instead of going to the storage room, they should go with him to the forest and meet Angie. I've been so confused lately that I declined, saying I'd rather wait until the weekend to have it all to myself. But I mentally accused him of not being open-minded enough. Thursday, July 17th. I don't look forward to the weekend because I'm afraid it won't give me what I need. I used to think Derek was great in bed, but now I'm terrified that he won't be able to satisfy my desire for another man. I think about Marcus all the time and my body aches to be with him. Usually, when you try to resist temptation, you collect negative points to use as reasons for inaction, but that doesn't work in this case. Thinking about 10 days with Marcus and his brothers, rather than scaring me away, confuses me, and perhaps even attracts me more than the possibility of being alone with Marcus. The prospect of pregnancy followed by the hassle of having a baby should be enough of a deterrent, but I find myself stopping on the street and peering longingly into the strollers of black and mixed-race children. The only factor holding me back is my strong desire not to destroy the lives and happiness of Dawn and our children. This is the only thing that has kept me going so far, but I fear that the raging desire, if left unchecked, will eventually weaken my resolve. This was my last entry. I had a terrible feeling of emptiness, but I'm not sure if it's because of my situation or because there's nothing left to read. At this point, it was 3 a.m. on Sunday, July 18th. I poured myself another whiskey and began to reread the entries, not in order, but jumping back and forth between the most piquant passages. Tired after a sleepless night, I woke up the children, fed them breakfast, and took everyone to the local park. Opposite the park, there is a shop owned by a Pakistani newspaper seller, but its window overlooks the part of the park where the swings are located. Once inside, I photocopied the diary, page by page, knowing that I would want to read those careless words from my wife over and over again. When Sandra returned home on Sunday afternoon, I thought she noticed that I was looking at her differently because she made a sharp look, but the next moment the children rushed towards her, interrupting any possible comments she might make. I quickly kissed her and left her with the children, so that it was only later, when the children had gone to bed, that we were left alone. Compared to her extreme vigor when she returned from the 3 previous courses, this time she seemed rather lethargic, and, choosing the moment, I told her so. "You're right," she said. "I was tired as usual, but this time it didn't give me the same pleasure. I didn't really want to go." I already knew this, but I couldn't tell her about it. My heart sank at the implications of her words. There was a rather long pause, and then Sandra spoke again, but now hesitantly. "Actually, I found out that there is another course that I could go to. I don't know exactly when it will take place, but the problem is that it lasts 10 full days and not just a weekend." I thought it was important to hide my knowledge and at the same time give the correct answers, so I simply asked if she wanted to take this course. "I'm very sophisticated," she said. It was too early to discuss, mainly because my feelings remained very conflicted. Trying to sound neutral, I said, "I don't think that's possible, honey. 10 days is too long to ask your parents to watch the kids, so I'll have to take time off to take care of them. That means I'll have to use my holiday reserve, and I would have to take them somewhere, but it would be without you. And there is also the problem of the children missing school if the course is at the wrong time. Maybe you could go through 2 or 3 years when they get older." "You're right, I'm being very selfish," Sandra said quickly, as if she needed the excuse. "I just felt like I needed this course to reach my full potential." After that, the question of her leaving was no longer raised, but I was almost sure that this thought had not left my wife's head. I waited for the first Friday after her return with barely contained excitement. Throughout the week, I knew she was doing something at work, but it didn't concern me because everything was long over by the time she returned home. Friday was the first time I consciously knew that my wife was going out for the evening and that by the time she returned to me, she would have other men. The real excitement was that she would be lying next to me in bed just minutes after leaving them. Fate was not kind to me because that evening my daughter had a toothache, and this forced me to cancel my plans. She started crying again almost immediately after Sandra went to bed, so I spent most of the night tending to the baby, allowing my wife to sleep peacefully after her escapades. The next morning, our entire little family went shopping, leaving me alone at home. The next week dragged on forever, but Friday finally arrived. The kids went to bed without any problems, but I spent the evening on edge, completely lost in my thoughts. At the right time, I checked on the children and quietly left the house to hide in the trees near the house. 10 minutes later, a taxi arrived and stopped not far from where I was hiding. The driver got out, took off his pants, and showed that he was more than ready for business. He climbed into the back seat, and I waited a couple of minutes to give them time before coming out of the bushes. The fact that they were both not looking out allowed me to move closer to see more details, but as soon as I did, they began to change positions, and I had to quickly hide. I watched her ride it for as long as I dared, and then carefully walked back into the house. It was perhaps 10 minutes before she came back to bed with me, pretending to be asleep. My plan was to wait until she was asleep and then slowly slide my hand between her legs to see what I would find there, but my tension and arousal got the better of me, causing my body to tremble. "Are you awake?" she asked. Instead of answering, I moved closer to her, hugged her, and pressed my face to her chest. Sandra must have understood my intention, but I think she forgot for a moment that it was me. She said no, but I muttered yes, with more determination than ever before. My head barely touched the pillow when suddenly the light came on. I saw Sandra looking at me with curiosity and a slight grin in her eyes as she asked, "What's gotten into you?" But then her expression changed. "You know everything, don't you?" she said. I think I nodded. Suddenly, it seemed that what was happening between us was too sensitive to discuss in the light, and she flicked the switch, returning us to the darkness. It seemed like time stood still for an eternity, although perhaps only a few seconds passed, but then she quietly asked, "You found the diary, right? I forgot to hide it and was worried that you might find it." "I didn't mean to spy," I answered defensively. "It was just lying there, and I started reading it without thinking, just to keep myself busy." "But now you know everything." "I read everything." And I was silent for a long time, and then slowly said, "I'm not sure there's an and here." Sandra's hand slowly found mine and squeezed it tightly, but she remained silent, perhaps still trying to make sense of my brief answer. "Have you read everything about Marcus?" "I read to the very end." "Well," she asked demandingly, since such frank recordings could not go unnoticed. The strength with which she squeezed my hand indicated how important it was to her to hear what I had to say next. The words that came out of my mouth seemed prepared in advance, although I had not thought them through. "I think if this is the only way for you to reach your potential, then you should take this 10-day course." "What about the possible consequences?" "We'll get through this like we always do," I said. My wife took a deep breath, as if relieved, and said quietly, "I love you, Dawn." This was my reward. We lay side by side, holding hands, until I finally fell asleep, happy and peaceful. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.